Folklore and urban legends have been passed through generations for hundreds of years, bringing us classic stories and characters throughout. Stories that have been told and retold countless times. The premise of an urban legend would be a story or event which would be told and passed in a chain of oral storytelling. As these stories were told throughout generations, with time, the tales would undergo changes and become legends which are still told around campfires and gatherings today. In this video, we take a look at the possible origins of our best known urban legends. Let's begin. Number 5. Bloody Mary. Step into any room containing a mirror, turn out the lights and light a candle. Stare deeply into your reflection and prepare yourself to summon the spirit of Bloody Mary. As for repeating her name 3 times whilst looking into the mirror will bring forth her grisly visage in place of your own reflection. At this stage there are 2 outcomes. You escape the room having called forth the spirit and seen for yourself that there are things outside our understanding of death, or the spirit, vengeful by nature, claims your eyes or even your life. Like all legends, there will be thousands of possibilities of where the story originated. From research, this seems to be the closest possible origin through history. First of all, mirrors. In the 1600s, mirrors were very expensive, and only the rich could normally get to experience amalgam-coated mirrors at the time. This would explain the fascination of them by the 1700s and the 1800s, and why there are many fairy tales, folklore, and stories in which they are used. For example, vampire tales in the 1800s, the classic 1857 tale of Snow White, and in the 1800s it was common for families to cover all mirrors when a person died in the particular room, to avoid the spirit from being trapped in the house. Point is, by the time mirrors were very commercialized, many superstitious beliefs began about them. In the 1700s, many different rituals were passed on to young girls. One was designed to encourage women to stand in front of the mirror on the night of Halloween. The woman needed to go up to the mirror in the dead of night and bring a candle towards the mirror. If she does this, she would see the face of her future husband, but there was a chance she would also see a skull. If she sees the skull, it would mean that she would die before getting married. Another was to encourage women to stand in front of the mirror, and scratches on her cheek or drawing of blood would occur if the girl had committed any sins. These early rituals are said to be the earliest connection to the legend we all now know as Bloody Mary. One theory as to why this evolved into what we now know was that it started as an obscure rite of passage for young women to adapt to the changes of puberty. Bloody Mary is the crude symbolism of the physical changes, and the mirror is symbolic of the girl's self-image, which, although is only one theory, is interesting to note that Bloody Mary ritual is still commonly used in prepubescent sleepovers as a show of bravery. Number 4. The Vanishing Hitchhiker. This legend tells of a man driving through a darkened road and finds a woman hitchhiking. He picks her up and she tells him the address she needs to get to. After a while driving, the man turns to look back to discover she is no longer there. After stopping and looking for her, he decides to drive to the address given. He rings the bell of the address and a man answers. After the driver explains the situation, the man, visibly shocked, says, "That description fits my wife. She passed away a few years ago in an automobile accident around the corner," which happens to be the very place the driver picked her up. This legend has been studied by folklorists Richard K. Beardsley and Rosalie Hankey, as they tried to find the origins of the story. Some stories had dates and addresses that they managed to go back and track the legend back to its roots. The eldest account they found printed was in a newspaper that reported a similar story in 1934 in Berkeley, California. But in their research, they noted a growth in similar stories in many areas all around the 1930s, places like Cleveland, Ohio, Hot Springs, Virginia, Summit, Illinois, Montana, San Fernando, California, Honolulu, Hawaii, all just a year apart from each other. Through more research, they found some old stories said that she wore just black, and they found a book published in 1824, The Lady with a Velvet Collar, that has elements of the story. The story states that a student talks to a young woman crying near a guillotine, with a black velvet band around her neck. She wanted somewhere to stay for the night, and so they spend the night looking until morning, where the woman unexpectedly falls to the ground. The student calls for help from a police officer, only to have it explained that the woman was executed the previous day by use of the guillotine, and pulls the velvet band around her neck as her head rolls across the floor. Around the same areas of California where the first newspaper publication was made, they found another tale that was being reported 3 years previous called the Hitchhiking Thug, which could have also been a precursor to the birth of the modern legend due to its similarities in the same vein of twist ending, though instead of a disappearance by the passenger, it was a vicious attack. Number 3. killer in the back seat. One night, a woman went out with her friends. She left fairly late at night, got into her car and onto the deserted highway. After a few minutes, she noticed a lone pair of headlights in a rearview mirror, approaching at a pace slightly quicker than hers. As the car pulled up behind her, she glanced and saw the turn signal on. The car was going to pass. When suddenly it swerved back behind her, pulled up dangerously close to her and started flashing its high beams. Now she was getting nervous. The lights dimmed for a moment, and then came back on as the car behind her surged forward. The frightened woman struggled to keep her eyes on the road and fought the urge to look at the car behind her. Finally, her exit approached, but the car continued to follow, flashing the lights periodically. Through every stoplight and turn, it followed her until she pulled into her driveway. She figured her only hope was to make a mad dash into the house and call the police. As she flew from the car, so did the driver of the car behind her, and he screamed, "Lock the door and call the police." When the police arrived, the horrible truth was revealed to the woman. The man in the car had been trying to save her. As he pulled up behind her and his headlights illuminated her car, he saw the silhouette of a man with a knife rising up from the back seat to stab her, so he flashed his lights and the figure crouched back down. This legend is first noted back in 1967 in America and was alluded to by the Indiana University text by folklorist Carlos Drake in 1968. Whilst finding the original concept is hard, some say it was often used to be told as a lesson to always check your back seat before driving, as one incident did occur in 1964 in New York City, when an escaped murderer hid in the back seat of a car. The car, ironically, belonged to a police detective who shot the man upon discovery. Number 2. Aren't you glad you didn't turn on the lights? Widely circulated on college campuses, this legend tells the story of two girls sharing a dormitory room and takes place on the night before a final exam. One of the girls gets invited to a party the night before, and when she returns to her dorm room, she doesn't want to wake her friend, so she goes straight to bed without turning on any lights. When she wakes up in the morning, she rolls over to find her friend had been brutally murdered in her bed across the room, and written on the wall in her blood is the phrase, "Aren't you glad you didn't turn on the lights?" This is a variant of a popular urban legend given the title The Roommate's Death by folklorist Jan Harold Brunvand in 1981. In every version of The Roommate's Death, someone is murdered right under the nose of the unsuspecting female protagonist, but because the lights are out or the crime takes place in another room, the victim's body isn't discovered until later, usually the next morning. As the story is sometimes told, the protagonist hears suspicious noises when the crime is being committed, but is afraid to investigate because she thinks it could be an intruder coming after her. This kind of story has been told for at least 30 years, typically in America, and very much falls under the category of a cautionary tale. Whilst the origins are not clear as to the first telling of this story or any real-world crimes reported and documented in recent history, it is definitely one of the more prevalent within urban legends. Number 1. The babysitter and the man upstairs. This urban legend tells the story of a babysitter that starts getting phone calls from a strange man asking her questions that get progressively more personal and conclude with whether or not she has checked on the children. She ends up calling the police, who proceed to trace the stranger's call. They immediately call the babysitter back and tell her to get the kids out of the house immediately, because the calls are coming from within the house itself. It is at this moment that the police arrive to find a man in the upstairs room where the kids are sleeping, but it is already too late as the kids have been brutally murdered. The origins and crime on which this urban legend is based happened in 1950. On the evening of March 18th, 1950, 13-year-old Janet Chrisman was babysitting 3-year-old Gregory Romack at his home on West Boulevard and Stewart Road in Columbia, Missouri. Sometime after Chrisman put the toddler to bed, and before his parents returned home at 1:30 in the morning, an intruder shattered a window and attacked her in the Romacks' living room. Although a garden hose left outside was used to break the window, police said the furniture and light fixtures near the window were totally undisturbed, making it impossible for him to have entered that way. This indicated to investigators that the intruder attempted to make it look like the house had been broken into, when in reality, Chrisman probably opened the door for someone that she knew, who was responsible for her murder. While the core element of the attack happening to a babysitter from inside the house remains for the urban legend and the real-life event, many aspects of the legend have been embellished and fabricated to make for an even scarier story.